stuff? This is not my stuff.
Is that it? Hey you guys, we're number 2 on the agenda, and then we'll be gone. We only have one item. Hi. Good. Hi. Just the facts, Jack. Hi. So Tracy just gave a Just the Facts Jack pep talk.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Which is good. So
Yeah.
That's what we do. Just the facts.
Okay.
Good morning, Councillor Grimes. These are the like 3 or 4 councillors that I haven't met with yet on the org review. Councillor Lay, Councillor Grimes, Mayor's Office, and Councillor Wong-Tam. Those are the 4. I feel very pleased. Thank you for sending these Q&As.
Yes.
It's helpful.
Did you see the motions?
Yes, I do. They all look pretty. I mean, you know, whether we like them or we don't like
They're
them.
working out Chrissy's over
Oh,
there.
okay.
But it's more of a licensing thing because it's the permit.
It's the
season
permit,
plans.
yeah. So it was a 15% increase over the base,
Yeah.
right? To keep it in the.
Yeah.
Did we see, I was going to look up I was going to go to TMMS. Not. Scroll in here. You know what? I don't really need my computer except to do.
This is me.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all to meeting number 2 of the Economic and Community Development Committee. Welcome committee members and also visiting members of council who may be in attendance. There are none here at the moment. And of course, the public and the media. You can follow the agenda debate on your computer, tablet, and or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. The Economic Development Committee acknowledges the land we're meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people, and is in fact home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Members, are there any declaration under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I have been requested to do the following, and this is the new Municipal Conflict of Interest Act additional requirement for members. And I want to just take a moment to remind members that when you declare an interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and this is new for us, the MCIA, you are now required to file a written declaration with the clerk. The clerk has provided blank forms from every member's office, and I've asked that you complete and bring them with you to each meetings where or when you declare an interest. If you have forgotten to bring these forms, the clerk staff can provide you with one which you should complete and submit before the end of the meeting. So, Madam Clerk, what happens if you don't do that?
We would follow up.
Okay, the clerk has indicated that they would follow up because sometimes you're not able to fill those out for whatever reason. If you need more information on your obligations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, I would refer you to the Integrity Commissioner's interpretation bulletin. I believe the clerk has copies as well, and if you require additional advice, I would encourage you to seek out the Integrity Commissioner directly. She is quite capable and able to assist members in ensuring that they follow their obligation under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. All right. I'd like to ask for a motion for confirmation of the January 16th Act. Councillor Lai, all those in favor, opposed, that carries. Okay, we have a number of speakers according to my speakers list. And are there any additional presentations? We have a staff presentation, right? We have staff? On two, yeah. Okay, good. Any additional reports, communications?
We just handed out the report on item 1.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. But we will do that after we've completed that.
And there's a new business item.
From Councillor Eden. Okay, fantastic. Is Councillor Cressy moving this, or we're moving this? on behalf. Okay, that's fine. Okay, members, we're ready to proceed. The first item on the agenda is EC 2.1, the appointment of the city's poet laureate. I'm going to hold that for a moment and just proceed through the agendas, and we will determine which items members wish to hold. The next item is EC 2.2, Economic and Community Development Committee 2019 overview. We have a presentation, so we will hold that item. The next item is EC 2.3, Harmonized Bylaw and Fees for Sidewalk, Cafés, Parklets, and Marketing Display. We have speakers. We will be holding that item down. Next item is EC 2.4, Request for Authority to Enter into Agreement for Operational and Funding. Let me just finish reading. Thank you, Councillor. That's fast, Councillor Cressy. Funding support for heavy urban search and rescue, HUSAR, and chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosive CBRNE programs. Councillor Cressy, how did you wish to deal with that particular item? Okay. Councillor Cressy is going to move the recommendations in that item. It's good news. It's more money for the fire chief and the different programs and so on that they're running to make sure that the city is safe, and if there's a need for, obviously, the particular service, but to ensure that they're funded. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. We have dispensed of that item. EC 2.5, 2019 allocations of community grants. I'd like to hold that, Councillor? Did you want to hold it or you want to move it? Okay. Okay. Councillor Lai, are you good with this item? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. ED 2.6, appointments to Business Improvement Area Board of Management.
Chairman?
Yes. Councillor Grimes?
Councillor Coles asked me to defer this to the next meeting no earlier than June 26, 19.
Right, so I appreciate that, Councillor, but I'd like to just hold this down.
Okay.
I do have some questions for staff because I'm concerned about a few things, particularly some budgetary operation and what will happen in terms of in the interim, how this particular BIA will be functioning and so on. So I'd like to maybe ask staff some questions to help us on that.
Right.
So hold that down. Thank you.
You got the letter from Councillor Cole, right?
I did. Thank you.
And Councillor Robbins.
Yes, the joint letters. Okay, moving right along, EC 2.7, propose Little Portugal on Dundas BIA. It's a poll. This is a merger of two BIAs and so on. Councillor Cressy? Happy to move it. Happy to move it. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. EC 2.8, Business Improvement Areas BIA 2019 Operation Budget, Report Number 2. Councillor Grimes, Vice Chair, is moving it. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. EC 2.10, Implementation of Reaching Home, Canada's Homeless Strategy. I'd like to hold that. Some questions? Okay. Good. Did we? Okay, we have to go back. Oh, yes, we did. All right, so members, we missed number 9. It was at the very bottom of the page. We flipped over. That's the bulletin, EC 2.9, Toronto Economic Bulletin. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, good. That's what I thought we would do with that one. I was just ahead of myself. Okay, moving on to EC 2.11, Public Wi-Fi and Community Recreation Facilities. It's a communication from Councillor Grimes. Okay, Councillor Grimes' recommendation is to General Manager. Okay, all those in favor? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Hold. Okay, And members, the final item here, although I think we have an item of new business, we'll get to that in a moment, but on the agenda items at the moment, EC 2.13, this relates to the fire at Agent Court Community Center. Councillor Lai? Oh, did I? Oh, okay. All right, okay. All right, fair enough. All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Okay. EC 2.12, partnership that produces best practices for international metropolitan partnership. Now, Councillor Carroll had asked for this particular item to be here. She's running a few minutes late, so I'd like to hold this item until she arrives to see what she wishes to do with this item. So I'll hold that in my name. Okay, so we have the new business item, which is okay. This is not new. It's Councillor Layton's. Yeah, members, we have an item to be added to the agenda. You all have a copy of it, I believe. It's correspondence from Councillor Layton, and so I'd like to move to add this item to the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. How would you like to dispense of it? I think staff is fine with it. Have you had a chance to read this? Anyone has any questions or concerns? Staff have none. It's in keeping with respect to the report. In fact, I believe that they're bringing the bylaws forward, and so I think that you can incorporate the request into that. Is that okay? Okay. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Good morning, Councillor Carroll. Welcome. Councillor Carroll, we've kept your item that you had on the agenda. I've held it so as to be able to address that a little bit later on your arrival, but you're here now, so good. Okay, members, so we are moving to item number 1, which is the appointment of the Poet Laureate, and I know that we had a placeholder of that item here, so we have the reports here. Madam Clerk is going to be handing out the report, and it will be going online in a moment so that it could be read. Okay? So, okay. Everybody's got, pardon?
They have a paper copy.
Okay, so what do you want to do with it? It's fine.
You can't proceed with it.
Yes. Okay. Good. So everyone's got paper copy? All right, and I believe it's being uploaded online in a moment, or as we speak. So members, going now to the first item on the agenda. Today I normally would say the pleasure of bidding someone farewell normally, but it's with a heavy heart that I'm asked to bid farewell to the city's current Poet Laureate, who has completed her term of service to the city in a very gallant fashion and in the fashion of excellence. And the position of the City of Toronto's Poet Laureate honors a poet who writes outstanding poetry and has written on the themes relevant to the people of Toronto. The Poet Laureate advocates for poetry and the arts, attracts people to the literary world, and offers their unique perspective to spark dialogue on contemporary issues. Anne Michaels has not rested in her duties since her appointment in the late 2015. She has championed the idea of Toronto as a city of languages. She has worked with the Bengali Literary Resource Center, with young racialized poets at George S. Henry Academy. And she was featured at the Shabby Share monthly diversity reading series. She shared her poetry at Doors Open, the International Festival of Authors, Toronto Book Awards, Idea City at the Bentway, 3 Walks with Excellence near Jane Finch, the Brickworks, and most profoundly, at the vigil for the victims of the North York van attack. And thank you so much for your distinguished service to the people of Toronto. Your words have touched so many people, and we are, in fact, forever indebted to you. Please, Anne, would you stand and be acknowledged? Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Michaels. Ms. Michaels was a member of the 5-person jury that unanimously nominated her replacement. So we are in good hands going forward as well, because Ms. Michaels' has touched her replacement. I'm delighted, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce the jury's nominee to be Toronto's 6th Poet Laureate, Mr. Al Moritz, also known as A.F. Moritz. Al Moritz, his achievements are formidable. He has published 20 books of poetry, many of which have received national and international honors. His work has won the Giffen Poetry Prize, the Award in Literature of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and Poetry Magazine, Bess Hawken Award. He is among the Princeton series of contemporary poets, and 3 of his books were finalists for the Governor General's Award. His work has appeared regularly in journals such as Poetry, the Hudson Review, the American Poetry Review, the Paris Review, the Yale Review, the Partisan Review, and the Walrus, and in many editions of annual anthologies, the Best Canadian Poetry and the Best American Poetry. Al is currently the Blake C. Goldring Professor of the Arts and Society at the University of Toronto's Victoria College. His most recent book is The Sparrow, Selected Poem 2018. In unanimously recommending Al's appointment, the jury cited not only an unparalleled body of work that has profoundly shaped Toronto's literary community, but his extensive mentorship of young Toronto poets. The jury was confident that he would excel as an ambassador for the literary arts across all geographic, demographic, and stylistic boundaries. Following our committee's approval today, Mr. Moritz's nomination will proceed to council at the end of the month for sanction. Members and members of the public, please join me in welcome the individual proposed to stand as Toronto's next Poet Laureate, Mr. Al Moritz. Mr. Moritz. So, members, we're just going to take a moment to have a photo op, I think it's described as. So we're going to stand around front, and so apparently I'm doing it first, and then everyone's coming up together. So. we good? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so you want to set up? Yeah, okay. Yeah, set up, yep, thanks. Okay, members, we're going to resume the meeting. Staff is going to take a moment just to set up in order to present their overview of the 2019 agenda. Oh, right. Yeah, no, but it was set up. Just let them. Okay. So, members, the item that we just dealt with, I'd like to move for adoption of this item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Motion is approved. All right, Madam DCM, let us know when you're ready. Are you ready?
Good.
Madam DCMs, we have 2 DCMs this morning. Thank you. You may proceed.
Good morning, Chair, members of committee. Tracy and I appreciate this opportunity just to provide a high-level overview of the different divisions and program areas that are going to be supporting economic and community development this year. And we just have an outline of our presentation, and I'm just going to start by reviewing the mandate of the committee, which is primarily focused on fostering social cohesion and making recommendations aimed at strengthening our neighborhoods, our communities, as well as our economy. Now, the types of matters that committee is going to be considering, you'll see, are very broad. They capture a wide range of human and community services, social supports and employment supports, economic development and business growth matters, as well as matters impacting the livability of neighborhoods and the enjoyment of public spaces. So there are a number of divisions that are going to be supporting you. I think you're familiar with all of the GMs. They're here today, and they're across community and social services as well as infrastructure and development services. And I'm going to start just by providing an overview of those divisions under community and social services. So children's services, they're under the legislation. They're the service system manager for the city's child care system, and they actually manage the second largest child care system in Canada. So it's quite a robust system. They're responsible for child care delivery as well as providing the child care subsidies for eligible families and planning and managing that overall child care system across the city. There's just under 77,000 licensed child care spaces in the city, and that actually doesn't even accommodate 20% of the city's child care population. And these spaces are located across 19 child care home agencies, 1,000 child care centers, and the city actually has agreements with 700 of those child care centers, and we operate 51 child care centers and 1 agency, child care agency. So recognizing that the current system isn't robust enough to meet Toronto's needs, Council in April of 2017 approved a child care growth strategy, which the goal is to have enough spaces by 2026 to serve 50% of our child population birth to age 4, enough subsidy to provide subsidies to half of those spaces, and the goal of reducing fees for all families by 25 to 40%. The strategy, it is ambitious, and it does rely heavily on provincial funding, but I'm pleased to say that so far we are on track. Since 2017, we've added over 7,600 childcare spaces and over 4,600 subsidies. So moving on to economic development, there's 4 main program areas under this division: program growth and business growth and support, entertainment and film, arts and culture, and museum and heritage. So in 2018, we were very pleased that the division was able to meet Council's goal of an investment target of $25 per capita in the arts and culture area. They attracted $2 billion in investment in film and television activities, and they supported over 2,500 businesses and 83 BIAs. The division also manages 10 historic centers, and they oversee over 100 historic sites, as well as over 200 public art installations. Now, in terms of trends, the city is growing, but much of that economic growth right now is concentrated downtown, and hence the division is focusing its efforts on supporting and driving investment and programming in other areas across the city. And it's also working closely with Indigenous groups on various initiatives, including the work that it's doing with Council of Fire on the development of an Indian residential school survivor legacy structure. Moving on to long-term care. Our long-term care division is actually the largest nonprofit long-term care provider in the province, and it's recognized as a leader in the sector. We operate 10 long-term care homes, that's just over 2,600 beds, but they also deliver community-based programs. And those programs are aimed at helping clients that are living in the community maintain their independence and be able to live independently in their homes. Our 10 long-term care homes actually serve and support residents from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and faiths. Our 9 supportive housing sites support over 450 clients, and our homemaker and nursing programs support over 2,600 clients each year. Now, in terms of trends, we all know our population is aging, but what we're also seeing is that residents in our long-term care home have a higher level of needs and care, so they require more specialized and complex supports. With respect to PF&R, Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, it's a community recreation section, which is going to be largely supporting this committee. The other 2 sections, Parks and Urban Forestry, report to Infrastructure and Environment Committee, but there are certain services under Parks, such as the golf courses, the gardening programs, the community gardening programs, and we have some children teaching kitchens that are going to be reporting through to this committee. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but the city is the largest provider of community recreation in Canada, and we're also the largest single employer of youth. Needless to say, we have a vast array of assets to support all of our programming, and those assets help us deliver a diverse range, so the next slide, a diverse range of leisure and recreation programs for residents of all ages. Moving on to shelter support and housing. They are responsible for the city's homelessness and housing programs, and under the provincial legislation, the Housing Services Act, they're also the service system manager for the city's social housing system. So thousands of vulnerable Torontonians actually use our shelters every day. There's over 7,000 beds across 65 shelters and various motels. 10 of those shelters are operated by the city. And in 2018, the division was actually successful in housing over 8,000 individuals and families that were previously in our shelters were connected to housing. In terms of the city's social housing system, it's made up of over 90,000 units, and 58,500 of those units are in Toronto community housing. So in total, we have over 200 community-based agencies that provide social housing and homes to our more lower-income residents. And in terms of trends, the demand for shelters continues to grow, and our wait list for social housing continues to be high. But Council did approve a 3-year plan to expand the number of shelter beds by 1,000 beds by 2020, and we're on track for delivering that. And the division is also focused, working very much with planning, CREATIO, and affordable housing on accelerating development of affordable and supportive housing. Social development, finance, and administration, they provide the leadership on the city's community safety, social inclusion, and strong neighborhood strategies and programs, and they cluster their services under 4 main program areas. They are very much focused on supporting Toronto's vulnerable and equity-seeking populations. They support 31 neighborhood improvement areas, as well as they support communities that are in crisis. In 2018, they actually responded to over 650 violent and traumatic events in communities across our cities. They are leading the work in terms of transforming Toronto community housing, and they administer the city's 7 community grants programs. Now, some of the trends we are seeing in this area are a bit concerning for us as a city. We're seeing growing income and social inequality, an increase in gun violence, and continued barriers to both employment and social inclusion. And those are very concerning because it affects the city's social cohesion, which is very important for the city. We're a diverse city, and we've always taken pride in being able to bring those communities together. And so we do have plans in place to help reverse or mitigate some of those trends. Paramedic services, well, it's the largest municipal paramedic service in Canada. It's the 5th largest in North America. So they respond to about 4,000 emergency calls each year, and those calls continue to increase each year. They operate an accredited ambulance communication center for the province. It's fully modernized. I'm not sure if any of you have gone up to see the head office, but it's quite amazing. But they also provide other community-based programs, at-home medical care program. That's to support seniors and other vulnerable citizens to maintain their independence, but also to avert calls going into 911. And they have a number of public education campaigns and community-based programs also aimed at promoting the appropriate use of the 911 service. So in terms of trends, I mentioned that call demand continues to increase about 4% each year. And we expect that that is going to continue to be the trend. It's increased for the past 10 years, and we're seeing that looking forward, it'll continue to increase. And the drivers behind that are really the growing, aging population. So growing population, aging population, as well as we're seeing more vulnerable and marginalized residents in our city. So you'll notice on the chart that prior to 2012, we hadn't really increased paramedic staffing for a number of years, and that started to impact our response time. And then recognizing that, Council approved a 4-year plan. They introduced 220 paramedics between 2013 to 2016, and that brought response times back into normal ranges. And with the continuing increase in call demand that we're seeing, the Chief will be bringing forward to this committee a plan on an overall systems plan as well as a hiring plan on how we can best maintain those response times as our population continues to grow and age. Toronto Employment and Social Services, they oversee the 3rd largest social service system in Canada, and they are organized under 3 main service areas. So employment services, they work closely with employers and training providers across the city and to connect our social assistance clients, our welfare clients to jobs. We have the integrated case management and service planning section that supports clients in establishing plans on how to stabilize their situation and move on to employment. And then financial supports actually issues the financial and employment benefits to eligible clients. So in 2018, the division managed almost 105,000 cases. That represents 189,000 individuals roughly. Most of those individuals were under the age of 29, and most of them were single. Now, the average length that people stay on social assistance has been increasing. The average currently is 42 months, but over 50% of those clients are actually on for over 2 years. We all know that, working with the clients, we know and appreciate there's many barriers to employment, poor health, lack of Canadian experience, and you will note that 66% of our clients were born outside of Canada. So as I mentioned when I was talking about the growing income and social inequality and the trends that we're seeing, we do have a number of strategies in place that Council has approved. We do see the poverty reduction strategy as that overall umbrella strategy, and a lot of the other strategies then support that strategy. I'm not going to name them all. Suffice to say that we're on track in terms of implementation, and we do provide regular status reports to committee and to Council, and we post information on our website. I'm now going to turn it over to Tracy.
Good morning. So it sounds like you're going to have a very full agenda just with what Julie and the divisions are bringing you. Infrastructure and development services may arrive in guest appearances from time to time, but hopefully the work that we're bringing you to deal with is meaningful equally. So very, very briefly, municipal licensing and standards, as you know, responsible for bylaw enforcement of various things across the city, be it private property, public property. The work does not fit neatly into any of the mandates of these 4 committees. So we're really seeing our work, or MLS's work, stretched across all committees. The work that you'll be seeing at this committee today is representative of those that deal with broader city impacts. The noise bylaw, namely, will be one coming to you in April of this year. So those aspects of MLS work that deals with the broader city impacts. MLS, as I mentioned, enforces over 30 bylaws. We have the business licensing aspect, but also animal services. So a lot of very dedicated and focused folks that work on animal welfare issues in the city are things that you will see at this committee as well. One of the items that you're going to be seeing today is the effort of a joint work between MLS and Transportation and other divisions, economic development included, looking at harmonizing the Sidewalk, Cafe, Patio bylaw. And while the outcomes of this work will ultimately be hopefully a harmonized bylaw that provides consistency across the city, what it actually is the culmination of over 5 years of work in trying to find a balance between meeting everyone's shared interests in the use of our public space, in this particular case, the right-of-way, with the needs of the community to be able to access that right-of-way for free mobility. So hopefully today you'll see in this report a really great blend of where the economic interests, the community interests, and the real focus around social cohesion comes together in the form you wouldn't normally think of when we're talking about simply harmonizing a bylaw. But I'm looking forward to more discussion in that regard. Another IDS division that you'll be seeing is our fine Toronto Fire Services. Chief Pegg is here today. One of the important changes that happened this year is the chief, under his auspices as general manager, has assumed responsibility of the Office of Emergency Management. We're already seeing, and I saw Councillor Wong Tam here earlier, we're already seeing the benefits of having Toronto Fire Services and that emergency mandate overseeing the Office of Emergency Office of Emergency Management and how they respond to critical incidents and support the city. So that's a notable change for the fire chief this year, but an important one for the city. Toronto Fire, from a trends and facts perspective, we are seeing an increase in emergency calls, over 130,000. It's about over 9% increase year over year. Naturally, we're a bigger city, we're a vibrant city. At the same time, we're seeing an increasingly vertical city. So when we look at some of the challenges Toronto Fire encounters is how they manage their emergency response mandate in an ever-growing city that's moving up. So you're going to hear more from the fire chief this year in respect to his transformation plan, particularly around deployment optimization. One of the other fantastic things we hope to be coming back to you with is next week the fire chief is appearing in front of the Centre for Public Safety Excellence Commission, and he is defending our application. Commission on Fire Accreditation International is who he's appearing before, and if successful, which I'm truly sure he will be, the City of Toronto will become the largest city in North America with an accredited fire service. So you're going to have the great pleasure of hearing more about Toronto Fire Services later in this year through the committee work.
So in terms to this committee for consideration, I'm not going to go through them all, but they're there for your information. And in the appendices, we've provided some org charts with photographs. I'm sure you know us all, but that gives you an idea of, of all the people that are going to be coming here to support you. That concludes our presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We have questions. Councillor Carroll, would you like to begin?
Yes, and speaking of licensing...
Councillor Carroll, I apologize. I didn't realize. Councillor Nunziata,
sorry.
visiting councillor. Councillor, did you have questions? No questions? Okay, thank you very much for being here. Councillor Carroll, you may continue.
Yes, speaking of licensing being spread out, there's an issue that seems to have space all over the place, and that's, of course, the rooming house issue. Will that come here because it's partly a housing issue? And while there's a committee that's about building housing, we're dealing with supports and things like that. And some of the rooming house issues belong there. Others belong, well, part of it is a planning issue in my view, but planning disagrees with me. Speak to me about rooming houses in the year of 2019.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think where we've landed, Councillor Carroll, with some of these things that, as you very well articulated, don't necessarily fit into any one box, we are going to be looking at what the substantive nature of the report is, and that will help direct where the report belongs. I think with the rooming house one is one that's come up quite a bit. And we're thinking Planning and Housing Committee. But certainly if it's in the context of the broader housing strategy or something related to whatever the subject matter is, it may shift. So
Okay.
I think we've landed on that. There, during this new committee structure, especially with the MLS work, it seemed to be very difficult. So what we've landed on with clerks is really understanding what is the substantive nature of the discussion, and that will help inform where that goes.
Okay. In the other cluster, I've got the key reports here. And we will get updates on strategy implementation. So the big question is, are those times so that we're seeing the update on where we've gone so far in strategies before we start to hear about the budget? Will they be in the front half of the year so that we've got in mind what we've done so far before we're reviewing budgets?
We'll ensure that those reports come before September, like by September, so that you'll have that information before we head into the 20.
Oh, okay, yeah, so if you weren't a member of Budget Committee, that's about when you'd start to be looking at it. Okay, and one last question. The budget we've just come through, the big issue that bubbled up at deputations, and they had a little media strategy around it, was around paramedic services. And, you know, they were asking the budget to be bigger, but it was really more around the structural piece, how many part-time paramedics we have versus full-time and things like that. That's what was coming to us in those deputations. Is that something that we would need to move a motion to get a report in this committee on how we deliver the service, how we're staffing the positions? Because we see a budget and we see FTEs, so we don't really know the issue as well as they would like us to.
So as I mentioned in the presentation, we are bringing forward a report before the 2020 budget process kicks off on an overall, we'll provide the background on paramedic services, but an overall strategy looking at both systems and a hiring plan to help maintain our response time. So it's going to be a combination of how many additional paramedics, what's the right balance between part-time and full-time paramedics.
So that issue specifically will be contained in that report. I don't have to move anything.
No, you don't have to move. We've already had a motion moved at executive two.
Oh,
there will be a report
thank
coming.
you. Okay, super. Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. I put my fingers up to say two because there's one in the report, but I wanted to reinforce it to make sure that we actually got it correctly and restated it and so on. But on that trend, though, with respect to EMS, we realize the importance and realize, obviously when we have an increase in terms of a demand for service, whether or not it's a call volumes or what have you, and we may not have the right component of personnel, but you don't just kind of add them in. You have to look at a process in terms of how you incorporate them, whether or not it's part-time, full-time equivalent. Is that correct?
That's correct. We look at it much broader across the whole system and what's the best balance of resources and the types of resources to bring in to stabilize that system,
right,
and maintain our response times.
And I guess I just wanted to add, maybe if I can ask the chief, the acting chief, and as I said a few days ago, I'm not sure why he's acting. He should be the chief because he does the job really well. And I say that because I've had a chance to spend some time with him and see the things that are going on there. But Chief, I wonder if you can comment and just to help us to understand your perspective as to the nature of the work that has to be done, how you envision this plan coming forward. It's a 10-year plan. Is that what you're looking at for increasing your staffing levels?
Yes, to the chair. It's a multi-aspect to the plan. So it speaks to response to growth in calls and identifying vulnerable populations that are frequent users of EMS, and that's where the community paramedic program has been very beneficial at supporting that group. But it also speaks to the overall component of how we do our business. So the staffing plan also ties into the system plan of how we support our paramedics in the street. A very important component. So our psychological wellness program, and it's just not about the numbers of people. And I would just like to remind committee that we do have some collective bargaining requirements in terms of our agreement on the ratio of paramedics, full-time, part-time. So that's an important component. We are working very feverishly on this piece, and it's a very important piece to get together in terms of the dynamics that we work on a day-to-day basis, because healthcare is evolving in terms of community-based care. So we're trying to take those pieces in. So we're looking forward to presenting that to you.
Thank you. I guess I'll just turn my attention now to I guess, page 17, shelter support and housing administration. And one of the facts that you had in the fast facts category, you talked about 8,000 individuals and families connected to housing from shelter services. And if I could ask maybe Mr. Raftis, can you help us to understand that particular process, help us to understand what's happening there? Because that's transitioning and moving people into, is that permanent housing?
That's correct. Through the chair, that is correct, or to the chair. And there are a number of things going on there. So right from the streets to homes actually provides housing support to individuals living on the street, and there would be just under 300 people who they would have helped to house last year. Also through the 65 shelters across the city and a number of respite sites, we do have housing workers that are keenly focused on moving people out of shelter into permanent housing. And also through our refugee program, working with COSTI as a refugee serving organization. There's a lot of work going on there around moving people out of those programs and directly into housing. So the total sum, Mr. Chair, is approximately 8,000.
Okay, thank you. Can you help us to understand, we've had a really interesting winter, to say the least. It's bloody cold. So the shelter system, you have worked really hard to accommodate the demand that has been made of the system. Where are we in terms of your level of confidence that we have enough facilities to accommodate the needs? And or in addition to that, when I look at the numbers, because we get the numbers on a daily basis, and thank you very much for that, both in terms of the respite numbers as well as the overall shelters and so on, what is your level of confidence of our ability to respond to the need? And I know it continues to grow on a daily and hourly basis in some cases. How do you respond?
So to you, Mr. Chair, so I'll start by saying that staff cannot predict demand in this region. We have seen a dramatic...
Can anyone?
In my opinion, I would say no.
Okay, thank you.
In the past 2 years, we have seen the amount of service that the City of Toronto has provided dramatically increase. So 2016, back 10 years, we had approximately 4,500 shelter beds available, and that would be plus or minus 5%. Not exactly 4,500, but plus or minus 5%. Last night, we had over 7,000, actually about 7,300 shelter beds, as well as 805 respite spaces. So we've seen the increase in demand over the last 2 years go up by almost 80%, really, and we've responded directly to that. We are much more reliable from an operational point of view. We've completely rebuilt central intake. And so people accessing the shelter system, it's much more reliable today. And we know that on a nightly basis, the system is very tight, but we do have space for everyone who shows up and is looking for space. So I feel that we've made very significant improvements to the system. Can we always improve? I would say absolutely. We can continue to look to improve. But very challenging to understand what the actual demand would be in a city and region the size of Toronto and the GTA.
Excellent. My final question to through to Mr. Berlinger, if I could just ask you, just in terms of social development, finance, and so on, in terms of monitoring and tracking our success, what's the mechanism? What's the sort of system of measuring and in terms of reporting out the KPIs as such, in terms of work that you do?
To the chair, on individual program initiatives such as transit fare equity, we have good program measures and can report on impact. It's much more difficult to report on the impact of overall strategies, such as the poverty reduction strategy or youth equity strategy. We are developing a framework that will help us in articulating the impacts of those strategies at the strategy level, and I would hope to be in a position to provide council with more in that respect within the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Grimes, a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to get back to the paramedics again. I just heard the number 4% a year. The calls are going, and we expect that trend to continue. Why is that? What do we?
Our population's growing, our population's aging, and so remember, we're expecting like up to a third of our population by 2030 to be senior.
Oh, just population growth.
We're also seeing more marginalized and vulnerable individuals within the city.
Yeah,
So
and
all of that is impacting call demand.
And then which I know reduces our calls, but I did talk to the chief about this before, and we are taking on the paramedics. I was in the hospital a while back, and there was probably 7 paramedic teams lined up in the hallway up at Etobicoke General. We're tackling that. We're making some headway there.
Through the chair, actually in-hospital times have been stable for the last 4 or 5 years. It's the actual call volume increase on the numbers of calls that is impacting our availability and impacting our response.
So we're trying to get those paramedics back out onto the street, but they have to wait with a patient because they're waiting for beds in the hospitals. Are we making any headway there?
Yes, we are. We are working with the hospitals on, we have an offload nurse program that the province funds, and that's a very important piece. And the hospitals have actually used ambulance offload transfer time in their performance metric as well for admissions. So it has had some positive impact.
Great.
We've actually reduced the frequency of the really long offload delays, more than 3 hours.
Great. And one other question on the long-term care beds on our senior strategy. I think the number of beds was 2,600 on the long-term care, 2,600 beds. How many do we need? As we're, the population is aging, Councillor Thompson's going to be there very shortly. How many beds do we need?
Celebrating.
So we're actually not the service system manager for the long-term care. The province is, and they're the ones that do the capacity analysis and try and do that projection. Having said that, Council asked us to report back this year on how we can take on more of a unofficial service system manager role. So we're just, my understanding is long-term care is getting the data from the province, and we're going to be analyzing that and coming back to this committee with our recommendations.
Yeah, 2,600 beds, that seems very, very low to me.
It's low. The other concern we have in
Very low. I would say very low. No?
Yes, but the other concern we have in long-term care is that there's new provincial design standards. So a lot of the current homes have to be redeveloped to meet the new standards. Yeah. And the city, of course, will maintain its properties and its homes and rebuild them. But the concern is that the other providers, because we only have 10 of the long-term care homes, there's a lot more, but they may, because of land values, they may choose to sell their land in the city and redevelop outside of Toronto, which would impact Torontonians, because so we are working with the province to understand how we can both maintain and grow the number of beds within the city so that Torontonians that have aged in the city and require long-term care can get a bed within the community that they have grown up in and are accustomed to living in.
Okay. And just one question to our Chief Peg. I know this report can be coming back, and I think he's got a good handle on this, as the city does get vertical, and it's happening like instant, you know, in my area, Humber Bay Shores, Dundas being one of our growth areas where, you know, it goes through the planning stages. How involved is the Toronto Fire with the approvals of plannings, approving 49 50-story towers going like dominoes along Dundas, and making sure that our service has the equipment and the teams to be able to respond?
Through the chair, Councillor, I would say directly involved. So we're connected directly through IDS. My peer in planning sits literally across the table. So we're connected on the front end. Also, we are constantly monitoring our response time and effectiveness performance across the city. And it is through those metrics and analysis that are now informing all of the recommendations that come back in front of you with respect to both growth and deployment. So as DCM Cook indicated, we will have a report coming forward to this committee later in the year that looks specifically at some of the early outcomes of our what we're calling our deployment optimization work, which is will be a comprehensive review of not only the method by which we deploy, but all of the physical and human resources that attribute or account for part of that deployment. So that all of that work and the outcomes of that will be back in front of committee later this year as well.
Yeah, and just going back, I remember down the downtown halls, the hall on Adelaide Street was kind of a high, I'm not sure what the terminology was, a high-rise response unit. I think all the downtown stations are that way, but now as we go to the suburbs, we're seeing this growth. You know, all these stations eventually probably going to have the same responses as these stations that would, you know, back would be downtown, but now we're seeing that right across
Yeah, again, through the chair, I can tell you, Councillor, that there's already been a number of optimizations and improvements put in place. We are in the very last stages of placing another high-rise response unit in service in North. Historically, there's only been one specialized high-rise response vehicle downtown. There will now be one going north as well. And that is really the result of a whole comprehensive set of work that our staff have undertaken, looking at not only the response to high rises, but more specifically, the manner in which we deploy and fight fires and conduct rescue in high rises. So these are specialized trucks that literally package material and equipment that we need on a cart system that let us move it to elevated floors in a much more efficient manner. So that's happening. That's happening in North. We're also in the last stages of changing the hose packs. We have funding in our capital budget to finish this project, where we're actually changing both the size and style of firefighting hose that our crews deploy into high-rise, in essence allowing us to flow more water at a lower pressure, which lets us deal with the increasing vertical city without having to spend, countless millions of dollars on high pressure and that sort of thing. So really working to embrace technology and bring you back solutions that allows us to maintain those service fire protection service levels in an urban and increasingly vertical city without continuing to throw money at it.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor and Vice Chair Grimes. Councillor Lai.
First of all, I'd like to thank staff for doing such a good report here. As a new member of the committee, I have a better understanding of what the snapshot of what the committee mandates are. I guess I have just one question about long-term care home and services. I see that we are really doing a good job, actually, in trying to make sure that our aging population are looked after. And I'm just wondering whether there are any funding from the province, from the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Seniors to be able to help us with this, or are we in constant dialogue with them, or to work together to make sure that our seniors are being, especially aging in my ward, there's a lot of seniors. So I just wanted to see whether are we doing anything, or are we getting any funding to run those long-term care homes and services?
So on the operating side, it's around 80% of it is roughly funded through provincial funding. On the capital side, it works a little different. So on the capital side, we end up only covering a third of the capital costs through provincial funds, because the way it works is we have to redevelop the home or develop the home, and it's only once once the project's completed and the residents have moved in, that the province starts giving us a per diem to start paying down our mortgages and our loans. At the end, because that money is delayed in the way it flows, 2/3 of those costs are covered by the city. We are in dialogue with the province because they appreciate that the population's aging and that we're going to have to grow the number of long-term care homes. We need a better funding formula, particularly on the capital side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lai. Okay, speakers. Oh, Councillor Cressy, did you sure? Okay, no worries. Councillor Carroll to speak?
Yes. I'm looking for the page that it's towards the end of all the reports that are coming back. I asked about strategies. As I often say, we have so many strategies now, we need a strategy. I want to underscore the question I asked, that if we're going to have reports on where we are so far in the multi-year strategy implementations, that we try and bring them to the front end of the year so that they're really on our radar, they're really on our minds. Even September, with due respect, is a little late, because I think if we're on track or we know where we want to go, we really want to go away for the summer thinking about that. And we know that the NGOs that are always hammering us if we're behind on a strategy, they start to do their organizing work in the summer, and so then we're always rushing to get ahead of their spin or to figure out how we are going to fit this in. And it is earlier in the year. It's May or June sometimes that the mayor's letter sets targets. And we can set as many strategies as we want. If annually the assignment to all divisions and agencies is 0 increase and 0 new and enhanced, then we've just voted to not do whatever the strategy calls for us to do the next year. We've just adopted that. And then there's a fight at the end, okay, well, which ones will we do a little of? So wherever possible, and I know there probably already is a fleshed out work plan, but wherever possible, if we can get the updates on the strategies that we've adopted that are applicable to this committee in the front half of the year, then we really are with full knowledge proceeding to give direction and proceeding to debate and discuss whatever is the budget target letter going forward. And the only other comment I'll make is that I am now a walking encyclopedia on long-term care, having had to tour 12 homes and help someone settle in one, and figure out between the ones run by the city, the ones run by private firms, the ones contracted but really run by hospitals. There are all these various models, and I share the concern that I hear from others that while we have a relationship with the province and while it's their responsibility, it doesn't serve the aging population that lives in this community unless we are really looking at this as yet another housing issue. Because if we don't have the housing units, people are going to start opting into, if at all possible, on milder and milder health issues, into the long-term care system, because it will be their only housing option. It's affordable housing. If you are 78 and you have the mildest of mobility situations and you can go and live somewhere for $1,800, but you can't seem to get into our subsidized housing, the pressure will be on both. And so I think we really have to start hammering home that we need that capital strategy. We're as strapped as any school system in Ontario that is right now begging for a capital strategy, and we need to make as big a noise as those other interests are making so that we do end up catching up. I know that the hospitals are. I know the province is ordering non-city run homes to double in capacity, but not giving them a capital strategy to do it. And so they'll be looking to us to say, how do we partner? And it may mean going back to that original campus of care proposal and saying, how can we amp this up, but make a really loud noise about it at this point where we just went through a provincial election and all three parties promised big moves in long-term care. I think maybe this committee is going to have to make some noise in that area, really loud noises on capital. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Anyone else to speak? Okay, seeing none. I'll just take the opportunity to thank the staff for the double DCMs. It's nice having two DCMs at the meeting. Thank you very much, Ms. Cook. And thank all the staff members who are part of what I think is an amazing team of people, of professionals, who are tireless in terms of the work that they do. And oftentimes, I don't think they get enough credit and acknowledgement for sort of keying into the strategies that, Councillor Carroll speaks of and so on. And I do support the notion of ensuring that we are in front of everything. We know what our goals and objectives are. We know what we need to do, and clearly the issue around resources. But just dealing with the staff for a moment, because I think it's really important that people understand the capacity and the level of professionalism that exists within the body of the context of those in the economic development piece and the community development. These are talented people who I'm always amazed. Many I've worked with for, I guess, some for 16 years and even before that. And I see that they continue to grow with the times and the changes that are necessary to be implemented to affect better outcome and so on. I know that their objective is to make the lives of our citizens better, to ensure that there are greater opportunities and so on. And there are stress in the system, and the stress comes from simple fact that there is not enough resources. And we get that it's a global thing. But what I'm really amazed with and about is the fact that what exists in terms of the resources, how they're able to actually help to ensure that they maximize the outcome utilization of the limited resources that are available in a most efficient way to ensure that we provide the level of service and the expected, benefits that our residents expect. The presentation today is, and I'm hopeful, a reminder to members of committee at the work that we have to do, at the volume of things that will be coming forward to us. The staff will bring them forward, and I think that we have to appreciate, in some instances, the element of time, because oftentimes reports come forward, and we want it tomorrow, but there is a complexity in terms of the time that they have to get all the reports done, plus to ensure that things are being done properly, to check, to monitor, to ensure, again, that the level of efficiency that we expect through the system is coming through the system and so on. And so there are the requirements for the other levels of government to do more to help us, because rules are changed to reflect overall benefits and to ensure that we provide a greater level of service and efficiencies and so on. But those rules are not accompanied by the appropriate resources to help us. So, for example, in our long-term care facilities and so on, when you change the rules, you have to make the facilities bigger, doorways wider, and so on. Well, there's a need for resources, and whether or not it's our facilities or the facilities that are being obviously offered to the general public, that's a pressure, that's a demand. Banks are not running to you, lending you money so that you can do these repairs, because it's just not something that they're doing. So we need to understand what the requirements are, and it's not just a matter of extending one's hand out saying that we need more money. It is that there's a validity to the requests because of the pressure and the demands and the change in the rules to update and to ensure buildings are in place. I just want to turn my attention just for a moment to the strategies that, that was mentioned. I think it was on page 24, if my memory serves me correctly. These have been identified, that these are the things that we have, that Council has approved for this committee to focus on. Within those, while they're only, and I think there's probably 3, 9, 10, there's about 12 or 13 there. There are subtexts to those that are much bigger to the challenges that we actually have to deal with. So when you look at these, they seem rather simple, but there are huge component elements there that really, that we have to grasp, the not only the attention, but the focus and the purpose of these things. So I'd invite members of committee, if there are some areas here that you feel that you have an affinity towards and you really want to work towards, please take it upon yourself. Councillor Cressy and I, Councillor Grimes, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Lyon, we've all talked, but I just wanted to say that publicly, if you have an additional interest, please work with our staff and be the champion and advocate in addition to the work that you're doing here at committee. So again, I want to thank the staff for the report, and I would just move to receive the report that has been presented by the staff and ask members to keep this as part of the Bible of work of activities that is part of our agendas. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And thank you again, staff, for the information you've presented. Okay. Moving right along, members. Our next item is EC 2.3, Harmonized Bylaws and Fees for Sidewalk, Cafés, Parklets, and Marketing Displays. We have a number of speakers, and I'd like to call the first speaker, but before I do that, there are some names here that I have not recognized having been in front of committee before in terms of economic development specifically. I want to just remind members who are of the public who are speaking that you will have 5 minutes to speak. There are 2 clocks. One is behind you, and then there's one to the left of where you're going to be seating in the center area here. You'll have an opportunity to express yourself for 5 minutes. Members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask you questions if they so choose. It is then your opportunity to respond to those questions. If you don't hear the question appropriately or you don't understand the question, maybe just ask for some clarification. There's not an opportunity for members of the public to ask members of committee questions. So I just wanted to make sure that's very clear. At the 5 minutes, the clock will obviously, we'll stop it there and allow 4 members to ask questions. So the first speaker I have is David Crawford, St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. Mr. Crawford, good morning, sir, and come on up forward. You may take a seat at any one of those 3 chairs you wish. You'll have, again, Mr. Crawford, 5 minutes, sir. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is, as you've said, David Crawford, and I'm here on behalf of the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. The St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association supports boulevard cafes because they give vibrancy and life to our street. But it's very important that the cafes and the needs of regular pedestrians in our city are balanced. And overall, the staff report manages that very well. It's a complex issue. There's no question about that. Yeah. We have some specific comments. One of the main purposes of this review was to have a unified city bylaw. That seems to be happening, and that's a very sensible idea. One thing we've wanted from a long time is to have cafe permits posted, so it's obvious that this cafe actually has a permit. That has been achieved. We are very satisfied to see that the report recommends a fairly large number of possible concepts, if that's the right word. There are parklet cafes and standing cafes and so forth. We like that very much. There's one thing that we do not like is the fact that the current patio cafe bylaw, though it's not enforced very well or perhaps at all, says that there shouldn't be cafes in winter. The new proposed bylaw says you may keep your fences up in winter time. Yes. It's fine to keep fences up if something's happening inside the fence. But in most cases in the past, the fences have been there. They are simply in the way for people using sidewalks. And I know there are other people who will be speaking today with more information on that. The report also recommends that a cafe permit can be transferred. We're very satisfied with that. It makes sense. The one thing that we think perhaps the committee needs to think about transfers is it says that if a permit's transferred, if there are extensions on the permit, those are cancelled. However, there are permits, and we have quite a few in St. Lawrence, that the permit has been issued with restrictions, normally about hours. Frankly, with a smaller council and the amount of work councillors have to do, it doesn't make much sense to us that restrictions have to come back each time. So we would suggest that that you look at that particular aspect. It makes no sense to us. There are others here, as I've said, who will be talking about pedestrian clearways and so forth, so I won't go on about that. One thing we have found in the St. Lawrence area, and which has been a concern for many years, has been noise from patio cafes. We had frankly hoped that this might be dealt with in this bylaw, but we understand from staff that it's going to be part of the noise bylaw, and I see that's coming here in April, so I hope you're paying attention when that comes. There is one issue we really have had a problem with. It's the enforcement of the existing bylaw. There's no question it's hard to enforce because it's not well written. One thing it says in it is the fence shall be removed from within the street allowance during any period when the boulevard cafe operation is not in regular daily use. Seems to make sense. However, the MLS inspectors tell us they really can't enforce that to get empty and closures removed in the winter time because they have to be there all the time to see if perhaps someone is going out and having a cup of coffee there at 5 p.m. or such thing. So that doesn't make very much sense. So it's very important when the new bylaw comes in that it's very well written and easy to understand and enforce. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. You're at the 5-minute mark, sir. Thank you. I think there are some questions of you, sir, and we're looking forward to seeing you back in April then for the
Oh
notice.
dear, I was hoping not to be here again.
You're a wise man, I guess. Councillor Cressy.
David, thank you for being here and the thoughtful feedback. You mentioned one issue related to seasonality, that currently patios aren't permitted in the winter, but of course there's no enforcement to take them down. So the model in front of us here is simply to have one year-round model. Would the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association be in favor of exploring the possibility of a dual, a second tier of a seasonal model as well, perhaps with a reduced rate?
Absolutely. Okay. No question, that makes a lot of sense. Because we have nothing, I think we have no problem with a year-round operation if it's actually operating.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all my questions. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. There are no further questions of you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Gordon Brown at the Harbour Village Residents Association. Mr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you.
You'll have 5 minutes when you sit, sir. Let me know when you're ready.
Good morning. As the speaker said, my name is Gordon Brown. I'm with the Harbour Village Residents Association. Our neighborhood spans the area from Bathurst Street to Spadina Avenue, as Councillor Cressy knows very well, and from College to Bloor. With College, Harbour, and Bloor streets running through our neighborhood, we care deeply about the vibrancy of our main streets. But with a population that reflects the full diversity of ages and abilities seen across Toronto, we are equally concerned with making our streets more accessible to all who come to or pass through our neighborhood. As you can see from our submission, we applaud staff for the high degree of balance that they've achieved between pedestrian and business interests. As other speakers have said, it's not an easy task, and we appreciate that. You are troopers. But our review showed, the Purple Heart is coming. But our review showed—
We're waiting.
But our review showed two areas where we see things that are significantly off balance. The first has to do with removal of the 2025 end date for grandfathering of existing permits. In our December 2017 presentation, we encouraged committee members to serve pedestrians well by working with businesses to achieve a staged improvements ahead of the 2025 sunset date. But instead of a program advancement, we're surprised and disappointed to see that the firm end date has been replaced with a series of triggering conditions and a mitigation proposal to reduce the pedestrian impact of 150 grandfathered patios. We've been informed by staff that grandfathering is a top priority to businesses and to a number of councillors, and that this issue may directly influence support for the critical harmonizing bylaws that will finally deliver the long-promised pedestrian clearway. So with our expectation that Council will fund the clearway mitigation program and retain the important condition that grandfather ends with business transfer, we submit our concerns to you, but we withhold objection on this change. The second major concern is expressed by the previous speaker is the unexpected change to allow frontage-based cafes and marketing displays to remain on the sidewalk year-round. Combined with the grandfathering of existing permits, this means the installations whose railings are currently in obstruction for only 7 months of the year will now become a continuing challenge for pedestrians of all abilities throughout the winter, when walking conditions are their most hazardous and outdoor cafe use is likely to be minimal or none. And since storefront cafes are allowed to push the pedestrian clearway to the back of the curb face, pedestrians are walking within 6 inches of traffic. Curbside snow piling by the cafe owners who are now required to clear in front of their cafes, and bike lane plows who are instructed to place snow into the same curb area will make winter walking even a greater challenge with this change in place. In my opinion, the current bylaw got it right. Remove the railings from the sidewalk when cafes are not in daily use. which is 5 months of the year from November to March. By doing so, pedestrians get to enjoy the simple, natural pedestrian clearway that has them walking along the storefronts during these very wintry months. My 93-year-old mother, she's a Stephen Colbert fan, captured it well when I was updating her on crazy stuff that's happening in Toronto. Her take on it was that it sounds like businesses are getting a windfall and pedestrians are just being asked to take a fall. I leave that with you. In closing, we ask that this generally excellent report, and I want to stress that, be forwarded to Council for consideration with the requirement that staff present Council with options that address the very significant accessibility concerns you're hearing today with this winter operational option. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Are there any questions for Mr. Brown? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, sir. Okay, our next speaker is Michael Black, Walk Toronto Steering Committee. Mr. Black. Good morning and welcome, sir. Let me know when you're ready. I'll start your time. Fantastic.
Good morning. My name is Michael Black, and I'm speaking on behalf of Walk Toronto, a grassroots pedestrian advocacy group that works with various levels of government, community groups, and citizens to improve walking conditions and safety in Toronto. Walk Toronto is also a member of Sidewalks for All, a coalition that includes the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, which won't be deputing today, but whose positions regarding patios are aligned with Walk Toronto's. Walk Toronto supports staff recommendations for the proposed harmonized bylaw. Although these changes aren't perfect, we commend staff for their efforts in striking a balance between maintaining the street vibrancy provided by patios, treating businesses fairly, and improving sidewalk safety and accessibility for pedestrians. We believe that these three goals are entirely compatible. In fact, the provision of wide pedestrian clearways is essential for businesses in attracting customers. About 15% of Canadians have a disability. Also, the proportion of seniors is growing, and many of them may experience sight loss, mobility, balance, or cognitive issues. If they don't find a welcoming and accessible sidewalk environment, they're likely to take their business elsewhere. We're pleased to see in the staff report cane detectable features that will provide guidance for visually impaired people, as well as provisions for the pedestrian clearway, which should not have changes in direction of more than 20 degrees along a street block. We support staff's recommendations for pedestrian clearway width standards that are appropriate for a bustling metropolis like Toronto, which requires broader sidewalks than smaller cities. We believe that having a deadline for compliance would be preferable over grandparenting existing permit holders, a compromise that will eventually lead to full harmonization and consistency in the long term. However, we do have concerns about the potential for public confusion in the short term. To mitigate this, we propose the creation of a searchable online database of all existing permit holders who are grandparented, plus dedicated funding to resolve critical pedestrian clearway issues with grandparented patios. One of the objectives of the new bylaw is to enhance pedestrian movement and accessibility. Achieving this requires regular inspections of cafes and marketing displays, as well as the consistent enforcement of the new rules. Staff recommend creating temporary administrative staff positions. This is all very well, but we're concerned that without adequate permanent resources being allocated to enforcement, the present bylaw compliance rates, which are abysmal, will not improve in the future. Very few sidewalk cafes and marketing displays are operated continuously through Toronto's harsh winters. Most patio fences, railings, and enclosures that are kept in place off-season serve no useful purpose, yet they monopolize vital sidewalk space. Permanent cafe structures can have a negative impact on the walkability of sidewalks during the colder months. This is due to the snow and ice that can accumulate around them, significantly reducing the width of the clearway and impeding the operation of snowplows. In order to address these concerns, staff propose a set of rigorous winter maintenance rules that require permit holders to salt, sand, clear, and remove snow from sidewalks that have year-round patios adjacent to buildings. In theory, this sounds good, but in practice, we observe the city's enforcement of snow clearing standards is half-hearted, and we're not very confident that the new rules will be sufficient to ensure acceptable walking conditions. The rules need to be complemented by another measure. We suggest that the city adopt a dual permit system similar to the one proposed by the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. It would include the annual full fee permit that staff are recommending. In addition, we would like to see made available a warm season permit with a reduced fee. The granting of a cheaper seasonal permit would be contingent on the removal of unused enclosures, railings, and fences during the off-season, thus providing a financial incentive to free the sidewalk of obstructive patio elements throughout the winter months. The city wouldn't be forcing the owner of a grandparented patio to go to this trouble and expense, but businesses would have the option. And if they choose it, they could qualify for a cheaper cafe permit.
You just wrap up, sir, 5 minutes.
Wrap up?
Please.
We believe that a dual permit system will reduce the number of cafe enclosures that are kept in place through the challenging winter months, thus improving sidewalk accessibility. And crucially, it will do this in a gentle, non-mandatory way that will give flexibility to operators of sidewalk cafes.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions for Mr. Black? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your presentation, sir.
Been a pleasure.
Okay. Okay, moving right along, we have then Mr. John Carew from Tabia, Toronto Association of Business Improvement Area. Mr. Carew, you're no stranger to this committee.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I was sort of hopeful that this item would come back to this committee and council around June or July so we could hold it at a patio so we can all experience the importance and the ambiance that presents. You're in, there you go. So
we'll move that motion.
Move deferral, is that what would happen?
And, yeah.
No, all that aside, first and foremost, as noted by Ms. Cook earlier, this has been a 5-year marathon that we've been working on, a lot of ebbs and flows. I think we've landed at a place that is a balanced approach. It recognizes all the elements that are out there. The speakers before me certainly identified some of the issues, but they've also recognized the importance of patios and the sustainability of patios. Let's face it, City of Toronto is moving vertically. Patios specifically, or the living rooms, dining rooms, and kitchens of those people that are living in those 500 and 600 square foot condo units. Man, a person, people are naturally social animals. And as such, these facilities, especially during the warm days of the summer, were an important and integral part of the City of Toronto, and to reflect our not only our diversity but our ability to interact. So that said, thank the staff for taking that yeoman work on. They were complimented, and I will do the same. It's not an easy thing to do. But what you've got before you, as it stands, members of the committee, is a damn good bylaw. It truly is. If there is an opportunity for a 2-tier option or something that allows us to have a standard at one point and then the ability to buy in, so be it. I can tell you that this day, if you go westbound along Richmond, and that's the only way you can go legally unless you ride by bike, there is on Peter or John Street a couple of domes that are actually in place in a patio. It's in your ward, councillor. You're familiar with them. They work brilliantly. It's a small dome that houses 5 or 6 people in there. They're served out on that patio. What I'm trying to suggest is let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of that creativity is important in this city, and giving these businesses the option to work at this year-round is important. So somebody spoke about a special winter earlier. Absolutely, we have a special winter. I think we can all recollect days through the last few winters where 3 or 4 days could have been well used at a patio, and having that flexibility, we believe, is an important element. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we are absolutely in support of the bylaw as it stands, and encourage you to move same. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions for Mr. Carew? Okay, seeing none. Okay. Our next speaker is Adelki Oganabeo, I believe. That is Mr. Oganabeo is here. Okay, great. See us coming. Good morning and welcome, sir. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, and I'll give you an indication when you are like 30 seconds and 15 seconds towards completion, and members may ask you questions if you wish. So you may want to maybe just lean a little further towards the mic, sir, and it's in front of you. You may begin when you're ready, sir. Thank you.
My name is Adeleke Ogunbayo. I am sent here by CNIB, and I'm ambassador and advocacy for CNIB. Having going through the sidewalk and also market display, I want to recommend and bring to notice of. I'm here to just to be like a public notice of people with disability as a visually impaired. Using myself as a critical example of my mobility moving around the town of Toronto, I believe that they've already done a good job by creating more, trying to create awareness. And CNIB and Balance, they are very non-governmental organizations who have really contributed to social service of community development of people with disability. For I am a critical example. I'm a refugee to Canada. With my disability, they're able to give me mobility training to access the sidewalk and safely with my guide cane. And also, so what I believe that is that I'll be glad and grateful if necessary funding and support can be given to this social service foundation who really working for the community development of people with disability, because when I came to Canada, I knew nothing. So I was recommended to this non-governmental organization who have come to give me mobility training and also a lot of services for me to live more independent within the community of Toronto. So concerning the street work, all have been said concerning the accessibility of people with visual impairment and loss of vision, because a lot of barriers have been broken for living independent with such people with disability to live more independently. So whatever the bylaw putting into consideration for the sidewalk cafe, I will be glad if the public notice can be put into consideration of people with loss of vision and visual impairment for more accessibility of mobility and more safety and independent of moving around safely. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me just check, sir, before you move, if there are any questions of you. Okay. There are no questions of you, sir. Thank you very much. We're going to get some assistance for you. Our next speaker is Debbie Gillespie. Ms. Gillespie, you're here? Okay.
Circle into the desk. Sit down.
Oh, I'm good to sit
down.
Good morning, Ms. Gillespie.
Good morning, sir.
I'm the chair. I'm Councillor Michael Thompson. I'm going to offer you an opportunity just to be aware of the timing. You'll have 5 minutes, as we've indicated. As I've said to the gentleman prior to you, I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left and then 15 seconds and so on. So you have 5 minutes, and you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. It's a pleasure to see you in action. I happen to live in your ward, so it's a
Thank
pleasure.
you. We have not met before, but I'm happy to meet you.
No, we have not. I've met some of your staff, though.
True.
I'm here representing CNIB, and before I begin, I would like to thank the city and for preparing this report and working closely to ensure the long-awaited 2.1 meter clear width. Normally, by the way, all of you, I do these with my Braille display, and I left that at my home because of the winter, so I will be using my iPhone. This is the first time I've done it this way, so it should be fine. It's just that you have to be resourceful. We've had the pleasure of working closely with AEBC, Walk Toronto, Harbour Village, and St. Lawrence Neighbourhood Associations, and it's been a great pleasure to work in conjunction with the city staff on this bylaw. And there were some frank discussions, and we've all had a chance to air our concerns, and I'll express the CNIB concerns. Basically, we do support the bylaw, as many of the speakers prior to me have done, but I'd like to highlight the concerns, and I'll end with a teachable moment, if I may, for the last 30 seconds. The concerns are the winter enclosures for those who are blind and partially sighted. The problem is if some of the fencing that may not be used narrows the clearway significantly in the winter, and we all do know that snow plowing and clearing is something that we all need, but you know, some winters it's easier to do than others, as we can all attest. The point here is that we need to always ensure an intuitive, delineated, clear way with as little deviation as possible, and we have arrived at the 20-degree deviation for the path. I'll come back to that in my teachable moment, if I may. The other concern is bylaw enforcement. I know it looks good on paper, and I understand there are resources put into this process, but it will be interesting to see at the end of the report period, which I'm hoping is 1 year, that we'll see how this goes. These things, you know, that's what vibrancy, city vibrancy is, and there's not one of us, I suspect, in this room who does not love sidewalk cafes, especially in the nice, warm, seasonal weather. We'd like to see the two-tier license system. I think it would be great for businesses as well as pedestrians who use this process. It allows people to have a little more flexibility, and like as I say, there are some things in the bylaw that we're not as keen on, like the grandfathering, but overall this bylaw does address the majority of the needs. I promised you a teachable moment, and this is it. If I could just have a time check, I'd appreciate it, Mr. Thompson.
You have lots of time. You're at 3:23.
Okay, we're good.
Lots of time.
Basically, for people who are blind or partially sighted, using the surface, whether you use a guide dog or a cane for navigation, and in fact, seniors also can benefit from this when they have mobility devices, including walkers and kids with strollers and so on. And we mustn't forget that group, because they're often out in pedestrian situations. Basically, people who have low vision or very little vision, as I do, that we rely on predictable surfaces or intuitive pathways, as I like to call them. These pathways not only allow you to know when you're wayfinding, A, if you're going in the right place, and B, when you're not going in the right place. And honestly, that is just as important as getting where you're going, because I hate to backtrack, and many people do. So it's important that to get inside one of these fenced areas and not be able to get out, as an example, or to deviate
30
too
seconds.
far from the path. So those are a teachable piece of moment, whether you're a guide dog user, a cane user, or you're relying on your vision. Visual cues and tactile cues are very crucial to people who have vision
15
issues.
seconds.
Thank you very much, sir.
No worries. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you so much for the teachable moment, because that's very helpful to all of us here. Are there any questions at all? Okay, we have a question now for you, ma'am, so we'll just ask you to invite you to stay a little bit longer. So let me just get Ms. Gillespie ready.
I asked many myself, so I'm good with it.
Okay, fantastic. Councillor Lai has questions of you. You may begin, Councillor.
Mr. Chair, I guess I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I thank you very much for coming to express your needs to the committee. And I just learned that I think we should be mindful about other people like yourself and the seniors as well in establishing all these kind of bylaws. So I thank you very much for, it's a very good presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Gillespie, and look forward to seeing you soon in the ward. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day. Okay, we have one final speaker, and that is John Ray. Mr. Ray is here. Just get everyone a moment just to... Good morning, Mr. Ray.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
I'm Michael Thompson. I'm the chair of the committee, and I want to welcome you to the meeting this morning. In a moment, you'll comment, but I just wanted to assist you, sir, with respect to the time.
I understand the process.
Oh, fantastic. I really appreciate that you do, but I wanted to make sure that at the 30-second mark, I'll let you know there, and going
Yes,
into...
you are clearly on to people like me,
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, because with your visual clock, you're not going to let me get away and claim I didn't see it.
So you're on to me then.
You got me, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, sir.
Well, foiled again.
Thank you. You may begin when you're ready, sir.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Ray. I'm a board member of the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. So I do a lot of work on various aspects of accessibility work. I want to say at the outset that I enjoy patio life. I enjoy eating on a patio. Having said that, however, I believe that sidewalks are and must be first and foremost and always for pedestrians. And I submit that our sidewalks are less and less for pedestrians as time has gone on. What I mean by that, as I attempt to make my way throughout our great city, I find more and more obstructions, more and more items that I put in the category of sidewalk clutter, things that are in my way, things that get in the way of what Ms. Gillespie talked about as predictable thoroughfares. This is a problem. This is a problem, and extending the size of patios is only going to further exacerbate that problem. I do want to say I support a consistent bylaw across the entirety of the city. I do also believe that fences should be taken down during the wintertime. And I support fully the presence of what we could call fences or some sort of barrier, both as a pedestrian and as a diner. As I'm trying to make my way along a sidewalk, I would rather not end up in the midst of a bunch of diners at their tables. Thus, a barrier of some sort is a great benefit. At the same time, when I am dining, I want to be able to enjoy my meal and my companions free of bother from pedestrians wandering among us. So I believe the presence of fences, barriers, call them what you like, achieve both objectives and achieve them quite well. So I guess in conclusion, what I really want to say is that we need to do a better job of providing safe, accessible, wide pedestrian ways so that Torontonians will feel safer and more apt to walk. Some years ago, our great city hosted an international walk conference, the goal of which was to encourage citizens and residents to do more walking. I want to be able to join that group, but I have to say, today there are simply too many obstacles in my path on the sidewalks where they don't belong, and that dissuades me from becoming a real walker. Mr. Chairman, I urge the committee to do more for pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions for Mr. Ray? There are no questions of you, sir. Thank you. Okay. Members, we now have an opportunity to ask some questions of staff. Visiting Councillor Wong Tam, do you have questions of staff?
Just a couple of them.
Okay, thank you. Let me just start your time. You may begin, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the recommendations that are before us, there is an introduction of what will be a new seasonal all year round patio license. Can you describe the pros and cons of such an initiative?
Sure, I'll start, and my colleagues may weigh in. It gives consistency that all people with patios are adhering to the rules. We've had discussions about potentially seasonal permits and a 6, a 9, and a 12 as we do with food trucks. And what that could do is that Councillor Cressy could have a 6-month, Councillor Carroll a 9-month, and Councillor Wong Tam a 12, and then predictability and consistency for enforcement purposes and the community to know they're up, they're down, the pedestrians. So that is one of the elements. We have not had a lot of compliance with people removing them on November 15th. It hasn't been a common practice. By having them, they are still required to remove the snow in front of them. So the businesses are required. Again, the consistency, if they're up, they're down. I'm not sure from a visually impaired if that is the predictability, if it's always there and all of a sudden it's not. I don't know. I can't speak to that, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So those are some of the, I guess, opening remarks on that.
And with respect to enforcement, recognizing that if patios do stay up during the winter months, the furniture is to be used or some type of animation is to be taking place. Is it the anticipation that we would all be dining outside in the winter? It was -21 last night. Would we be sitting out on these open patios with furniture, having drinks and food?
So probably not on the -21 days, but on the days where it's closer to 0, and there are opportunities to do it, or if we hadn't had snow for a while. Yeah. There's an interesting one in Councillor Cressy's ward on Duncan. I don't know if you've seen it. They are globes. It's a bit of a parklet. Walked past it the other night. And so again, it is being used in different temperatures. So obviously when there are good days, we want to use it, just like in the summer. If it's raining, they're not used, but they're kept up.
And are there any considerations that staff have taken, recognizing the Duncan project has structures that are placed over the seating area? Are there any parameters or how high any new structures that will provide weather protection, whether there's considerations for heating for outdoors? Are we allowing the permission to build new temporary structures in order to facilitate outdoor winter dining? And have you considered that in your report?
So I don't think we necessarily have design standards, and we've moved away from the enclosure. The previous version had an option for a temporary enclosure. This does not. We're also allowing heat through propane barbecues, obviously not in a flammable globe made of plastic, but on those patios you could have a propane or a gas heater that would allow you to have a drink, have hot chocolate on those patios.
Mm-hmm. And with respect to enforcement, so if animation is not taking place, but an operator has forgotten or perhaps they've chosen not to animate because there are days where the weather fluctuates, how do you have enough resources within your division to actually go out to do all this investigation and then active enforcement?
Okay, I'll start and then I'll have my colleague Rod Jones jump in. There is the new bylaw allows for a temporary removal of those if they are not adhering. So we do have a tool to remove them if they're not being good actors, but I'll let Rod jump in on, or your voice is probably deep enough to talk about the number of resources that we have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, members of committee. Councillor Carroll, I'll start with you first.
Well, yeah, thank you for letting me go next because I just want to follow on that. So what you just described, we're talking there's 40 bylaw officers, but really they're generalists within business. So they'll be enforcing this, but they're doing everything else to do with these licensed businesses? Because there are parts of the city where this isn't applicable at all, so they don't have to cover that. I don't have a single one of these. But in the areas where they're enforcing, what we've just heard is, well, there's an attempt to articulate here what's expected, snow clearing, et cetera. We've heard that there's a weakness there. So as we adopt this bylaw, you've got 40 officers, and we're changing a lot here, but we're also raising expectations. So is there going to be a training session that makes them realize you're not just checking who's got one, who hasn't, and we've harmonized that, but all of these mobility issues, particularly the winter issues, there'll be a heightened training around, and you now also have to police that so that there's a warning system and so on and so forth that really starts to improve that service? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Carroll. Councilor Kresge is next.
Thank you. On the grandfathering, so in the recommendation here, we don't have a fixed end date, but rather we have a series of triggers to eventually lead to harmonization. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So one of the recommendations we heard related to that is, one question we heard is, how will individuals or businesses be able to understand what is a grandfathered patio versus what is not? Is there a mechanism through our open data platform to do that?
So this data is on open data right now. What we could do is add a criteria, another field that says it has been grandparented or not.
Okay. Now, when we're looking at grandfathering, one question I have is for upcoming business improvement area construction projects, specifically Bloor Street, for example. So Bloor going under construction, the BI has been working on it for 6 years. It goes under construction this spring. Will those businesses, because city construction is one of the grandfathering triggers, will those businesses who had planned for this be grandfathered or not?
Through the chair, they would be, because their proposal has been in place for some time now. After September 1st, if they were in design after September 1st and starting effectively a new process, then the new rules would apply.
Okay, and so that, just so that the public is clear then, the trigger point for grandfathering is after September 1st, as opposed to after the bylaws are passed at council.
That's correct.
Okay, I think that's important to understand. On the seasonal question, so I understand the complications related to enforcement. Is there, I see a two-tier model, whereby you could have a pop-up warm weather version and then the year-round version as a way to reduce costs for businesses who want to pop up and then to reduce instructions in the street as well. Would you be able to report back as part of an expedited reporting cycle on the seasonal opportunity? Perhaps not as complex as a 6, 9, and 12, or maybe it's just a 3 or something of that sort?
I'll start with a pop-up would not necessarily be permitted. It needs to have rails.
Okay.
And so that, if they're going to be removed, taken down, removed, replaced, a pop-up wouldn't necessarily work to be that spontaneous. The spontaneity is permitted because they are already up, and if you get a stretch of good weather, then they could be used. I would prefer to look at seasonality and permits as we, in a year or so, or a year after the bylaw has been implemented. We commonly do this with new bylaws, that you see how they work, you test them, how is it working, and you come back in a year after they've been implemented to see the effectiveness or ineffectiveness and make those corrections.
Okay, and maybe just to follow on that, then would you be open to having, after a year of implementation, the report back? Because I noticed the original report back was 3 years. Would you be comfortable with the report back in 1 year, building on that?
3 years gives us a better data set or understanding, but if something has happened, then we would come back earlier. I'm happy either way. We have a significant amount of work on our plate already, but if it's the will of committee to come back in a year, that's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Kresge. Councilor Grimes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just over talking to Ms. Cook there about small marking display on page 5. And I asked my friend here on my left what a small marking display was. He said it's a sandwich board A-frame. I said, no, it's not. So what is a marketing display?
A marketing display is, think of along Spadina, fruits and vegetables, think along Avenue Road, flowers. It's that type of marketing display. There's other areas in the city where they're displaying clothing on the walls where it's for sale. So it's that type of flowers, fruits and vegetables. That's what marketing is.
Okay, because I was loaded for bear, went over to see Ms. Cook, and she told me, no, that's, okay. The A-frame signs, that's handled by our sign people?
That's correct. It's currently done by our investigation services group. We do permit them. There's about 218 that do have permits with the city.
And I'll ask this question to my good friend, Mr. Cruz here. I hear time and time again that we have to go to East York It can't be done online. There's only one place to go get your business license or one place to apply for that sign. And I think we're working on that. Is that correct?
That's correct. You do have to go to 850 Coxwell right now. The application is online, but it has to be submitted in person. This is a body of work that we're well aware of and that we do want to modernize, and with technology, we'll be moving towards people being able to do this online and from all parts of the city.
Any idea when that'll be coming forward?
We hope in the next 12 to 18 months.
I'll write that down. Another question. As my ward, I have 4 BAs. We're starting to see more patios come in. I've met with staff trying to help the business owner get a patio, and the visually impaired comes up that we want a straight line on that sidewalk. I had a gentleman that had a little bump out on his, but was not allowed to even move it. Through a motion of council, I moved the patio out closer to the street so the sidewalk's continuous. Are we allowing that now to cross the sidewalk with alcohol to a patio? That is now happening now?
The short answer, no, it's not. The short answer will be. There's 12 opportunities for cafes, and curbside is one of them. And we have worked with the AGCO on that you can walk across the sidewalk with that alcohol to that.
I'm already doing it.
Sorry?
I'm already doing it. Another question. Have you been down to Port Credit, where they're taking some of the parking spaces out now and they're building temporary wood decks? Which is, I get referred to that by my people all the why don't we do what Port Credit soon? Are we looking at that at all?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, we did pilot some of those on King Street just this summer.
Great, so we're looking to...
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, those are my questions.
One of the 12.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grimes. Councillor Lai?
I was looking at these maps, and I don't see my ward being on this.
You don't exist.
Because it doesn't exist. I'm just
Scarborough
wondering.
does not exist.
I'm just wondering.
Not now.
This marketing display permit fee, I mean, I don't know, maybe in my ward, people will display flowers or fruits or whatever outside on the street, but I'm just saying that this bylaw will apply to Scarborough, I suppose. This is just a question.
Absolutely. It's a citywide bylaw. Currently, patios are not permitted in Scarborough. This will open it up to allow them to happen on public spaces.
Oh, that's why it hasn't. We don't have it.
Discrimination.
Okay, thank you for clarification. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We'll just clarify that now, Councillor Lai, because Scarborough is not having its fair share of patios. We're going to change that, right? Thank you. Just a few questions for me. On page 2, the implementation, it talks about design support and funds will be available to help existing permit holders on Main Street and so on. Where are the funds coming from?
Mr. Chair, they're coming from the Public Realm Reserve Fund in Transportation Services.
Okay. So the report's intended to harmonize the bylaws and fees and so on. When will this actually become policy?
We've recommended a September 1st implementation date. I know that's after the patio season, but it's really important that we allow the time to build in the new processes, the training and enforcement, the public education, the back-end system work that needs to be done to ensure that we are up and running. And we've made mistakes in the past where we've gone too quickly, and we really try to give ourselves some lead time to get all the pieces in place, educate the community on what the rules are, including the public.
So we've learned our lessons. All right, it's nice to know.
You guys.
So it talks a little bit about, I guess I'm going back on the first page, it talks about reducing the application fees, reducing the fees for planting trees and so on. So our premise in terms of applying cost to anything that we do is based on cost recovery, is that correct?
We follow the city's user fee model, and it is about cost recovery. This type of activity has a huge impact on the community, so it gets discounted. And that's why we've discounted fees for applications, fees for the trees, and fees for the rental of the space.
Because there's, as you point out, community benefit, there's societal benefit, and so on.
That's correct.
Okay, that's very helpful. Now, A number of our speakers today have indicated that they're supportive of the report, this extensive report, the time, 4 to 5 years it's been spent in terms of the consultation. I've looked at the list of all the people that have been interviewed, submissions, and the meetings, the variety of meetings you've had over the years, quite extensive. There's still the concern about ensuring the accessibility and clearing to make sure that our sidewalk areas are clear for everyone in particular, but particularly for those who have are visually impaired and other mobility issues. So, and I heard the question around the sort of generalists of their MLS officers and so on. What is our expectation, or how is it that we will convey that message to the permit holders to ensure that they understand what our expectations are and the public's expectation for providing this permit to them?
Because we have a direct relationship with the permit holder and the business license, we will put the new sets of rules or a synopsis of them and a public education piece as part of our, when we issue a permit. So all new permits, we will say, these are the rules and this is what you must adhere to. At renewal of permit, there's an opportunity again to reinforce what those new rules are. So there's a big piece of education to the permit holders, and failure to adhere to comply with those could result in enforcement. So we want to educate, we want these to work well, and we want to advise them.
Right. And I guess just one final question with respect to the grandparenting issue. So if I own a business and someone wanted to acquire that business because I'm putting it up for sale, as it relates to something that I as the business owner would have to do in order to be in compliance, I'm just wondering why the status could not continue with respect to the new purchaser of the business, because it would, the seller would be looking at reduced income for that property. The purchaser would also be looking at reduced income because of the fact that if we are then looking at the compliance. And in some cases, the status is conveyed for quite some time, because if you own the business in its entirety, it would stay on. And then a little piece more to that question. If I, as a seller, wanted to maintain, let's say, a 5% ownership, would the status removal of the grandfathering still be in effect?
The 5% is a tough one. Maybe more, I'll ask my colleague in legal to jump in on that. Okay. But this was one of the triggers that we had looked at to meet the pedestrian clearway, as the transferability. And as population of our city, and I think it was yesterday we saw this at general government licensing, the growth of our city is going to be substantial, and pedestrian volumes are continuing to increase. Right. So that was the rationale behind the trigger. I know it's challenging for business to sell because you think you're buying as is. So I understand that. It is an issue we've looked at and beaten up, and is where we've landed.
Okay.
Corey, do you have anything on the 5%?
Yeah, no, I'll just jump in on that. It will depend on the structure. So if there's no change in the sort of the corporate entity that holds the permits, right, and it's more of an internal shareholder type arrangement that changes, this wouldn't necessarily impact the permit at all. It wouldn't be considered a transfer. The corporation would continue to hold the permit for the space. That may impact some of their business licensing models where there is a specific consideration of significant ownership changes, but that is a different issue.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. To speak, visiting Councillor, Councillor Wong-Tam, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank the staff as well as the community members who I know are not all represented here today. They have all worked incredibly hard over a number of years, and I know it's been really deep diving conversations. We have all learned quite a bit around the needs of those with accessibility and the accommodations that the city has to take into consideration if we're going to build this age-friendly city where people are going to be increasingly getting older and requiring access to clear pedestrian walkways. And I do think that they've struck this incredible balance of bringing it all together over those years. I was, and I know the community of accessibility advocates was personally disappointed when the item was deferred back in December, but nevertheless, we are here, and I think that this outcome is very, very good, and we can certainly stand by it. Councillor Cressy and I have been working on a motion, and he's going to move this, and I think that we would like, I would like to say that, having a 3-year report out is probably too long. I think that we would be very encouraged if we can actually come back within a year, the third quarter of 2020, to really understand before we sort of let this this harmonized bylaw run away, is that we would need to have a mechanism where we can bring it back in, just to make sure that what we think will happen is going to happen and we don't create any unintended consequences. So that's going to be one of the suggestions of the motion. The other one is, of course, to really explore the feasibility of creating these year-round and seasonal permits. Based on what we've already seen and with respect to the city's standards for snow clearing on accessibility, I think that the things that I've heard from the committee that I chair, the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, is that people are finding it more and more difficult to get around the city. Yesterday I had the pleasure and the honor of unveiling a new elevator at St. Patrick's subway station with Mayor Tory as well as Chair Robinson of the TTC, and that should have been a good news story. What I heard from the community after I had sent out a message saying, look, this is us on the way of AODA accommodations, was, that's great, Councillor, but it's too crowded. The platforms are not accessible. The walking conditions are extremely hazardous, and so therefore the elevator is great, but the rest of the system is not responding to the needs of those who are visually impaired, who are living with low vision, who have audible requirements. They can't hear the announcements and so forth. So on one hand, we take a step forward, and that's a very proud step with a lot of intention and purpose, and then we realize that something else has happened. So that's why I think it's important for us to have a 1-year review back, and then we can sit down and take a look at who has been in compliance, who has been maintaining their properties, and how many people have been suspended, or perhaps everybody is just well behaved. And the other thing is that I know that with respect to the different types of instruments that are now being introduced, sidewalk permits, cafe permits, curbside permits, and new parklets. In the old Ward 27, now Ward 13, we have demonstrated that it can work. In 2012, we introduced Celebrate Young, where we were the first ones in Toronto, in Canada, I think, to really transport the service of alcohol across the sidewalk into what was very modestly constructed parklets. We were also the first ones to introduce curbside patio and the parklet instruments in 2013, leading up to World Pride. They were fantastic and innovative programs, but they were not necessarily part of a larger street design. And that's why I think it's important that when we do work with the BIAs, let's take a look and study the entire block plan of how they want to improve that dramatic streetscaping, and whether or not the sidewalk conditions in front of a particular cluster of businesses, if they should all be parklets, so there is some continuity with respect to someone who's walking through with a visual aid such as a white cane, or if they should all be curbside parklets. In areas where you have 8 lanes of high-speed traffic, most likely they're not going to want to be parklets or curbside permits. They may be sidewalk patios. So we should take a look at that holistically as we move through BIA ambitious streetscape plans, as well as environmental assessments, which I know that Yonge Street is undergoing right now. And thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll to speak.
Well, just briefly to say that, well, in a way this doesn't apply to my ward now, it will very soon. And really to all subways, all subway communities, which means soon Scarborough as well. Because what's happening in retail around all those places where we're planning transit, along Eglinton, along the Shepherd subway, is retail places like Bayview Village Mall, I dare say Fairview Mall one day as well, because they had approval to develop on their parking lot lands 20 years ago, and they may exercise it. The change in retail that's sort of creating boulevards within those shopping center properties and putting residential in there and creating avenues means I'm going to have this challenge one day. Part of our policy is where they do that, we're making them create public roads in that space. It's already happened at Shops of Don Mills. And so, you know, I watch with interest. In North York Community Council, it's kind of like that saying, everything I know I learned in kindergarten. Everything I know about boulevard permits, I learned from watching angry deputants speak to Councillor Stintz and then Councillor Carmichael Greb, and I dare say Councillor Cole at the very next meeting probably, over boulevard cafes along Avenue North. That's the only place they exist in the North Community Council service district. But that's for now. I know that within 2 or 3 years, I will have places where I have to take the same angry deputations if we haven't got it right. So I looked at this, but I came here, I reminded myself, who's on this committee? Oh, that's right, Councillor Cressy. I don't have to worry because he's already got this problem in spades. He's going to read every part of this. So I want to thank not only staff, but the councillors who are already living with this for working so long with staff to try and get this right, to try and deal with the threat to accessibility issues that's inherent if we don't get it right, because I probably will deal with my first instance of this within 3 years as projects I know of right now become built out. And I know that Councillor Lai will as well, because as we start to intensify with transit in Scarborough, we will have avenues and boulevards because transit creates pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I should begin by thanking staff. We have many staff here from many divisions who it was referred to as a marathon earlier. It's been 5 years in the works. And I know in my briefing with staff before this, the message was, please just make sure you don't refer it back. And we will.
Councillor, you have motions?
Oh, excuse me, thank you.
Just to see their faces.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have 2 motions to place, which I'll speak to. Thank you. 3, excuse me, and I'll go through each of them. But first of all, I want to thank the staff. I want to thank the many stakeholders who've been here today, from residents associations, from WalkTO, from the accessibility community, and from the business community in Tabia. This is long overdue. It's long overdue to have a unified, citywide, harmonized plan to deal with both accessibility and vibrancy. And these are 2 objectives. And there are 2 objectives here, and I'm so pleased that we've come together on them. One is around the vibrancy of our streets and economic development and that which makes our city livable and exciting. And then the second piece is livability from pedestrian safety and accessibility. I know it's been alluded to, where do these exist right now? Well, I can say in downtown Toronto, Councillor Wong Tam and myself, the daytime population, or the residential population, maybe 240,000 people who live in downtown. But our daytime population is 900,000. We nearly quadruple in size in downtown every day because people work here, they shop here, they come to the games here, they go to the plays here, and you want to have both an animated district for people who live and visit here, but also a safe district for people who walk and ride and move through here. And so those are the 2 principal objectives. I would just say on the bylaws in front of us today that I think it is an effective compromise. Is it perfect? No, I don't think we were never going to reach perfection because somebody would be unhappy. This is an effective compromise on pedestrian clearances at 2.5 or 2.1, depending on where, increased enforcement, the different models of cafes that Councillor Wong Tam has spoken to. On the grandfathering, I will admit I would have preferred to see an end date in place, but I think we have reached a compromise on a triggering program. And I think it was very clever on the rates to prioritize a decrease in rates in neighborhood improvement areas and Toronto's only UNESCO heritage site, Kensington Market. Very clever. Whoever came up with that, I want to thank them for my old district. The motions we have here, very briefly, speak to a couple components. One is the online data around a specific chart on the list of grandfathered sites. I think that's a very clever idea that we heard from WalkTO that I know staff can easily take care of. To have a full report back after a year of implementation, so that's around Q3 next year, and to include as part of that report back, to look at a seasonal option, because I really see a seasonal option as a win-win. I see it as an opportunity for those patios that are not being used in winter to be disassembled so that there's more pedestrian clearance, but also an opportunity for a lower rate for a seasonal option for some businesses who say, you know what, we just want it in the warmer months. And so I could see that as a win-win. And so I will just close by saying this has been a long, drawn-out and complicated process. I think we have reached the sweet spot. I want to thank everybody for taking us there. And Mr. Chair, in the second meeting of this committee, you get to kick a 5-year process over the finish line. So thank you for your work on this as well. And those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. Okay. I just want to also acknowledge the terrific work by the many staff who've actually been able to engage the community, engage the stakeholders. And what we heard from the speakers here, we've had several speakers this morning, users of cafes and so on, and some have specific impairment issues as such, visual in some of the cases of the people who spoke this morning about accessibility and so on. And I think that it's not lost on us with respect to what we have to continue to do to ensure that the quality of life is reasonably expected to be enjoyed by all, and it's everyone who is impacted by that as an issue in the community and so on. I asked the questions around sort of the fees and the explanation that was given. It's helpful in terms of adjusting our expectations to meet the community demands and expectations, because that's a clever way of dealing with this without simply saying, well, we're going to charge you more and then we're going to use it investing here and so on. In fact, we are going to charge you the appropriate amount in order to ensure that there's resources to be able to invest in community benefits and so on. It's an overall livability benefit to everyone, and obviously the attraction of business and so on to the community. I particularly wanted to comment on the fact that the staff have actually taken their time and have actually been very patient with this. 5 years is a long time in many instances, but in our business, 5 years is not a long time, quite frankly, because of the level of expectation, all the different stakeholders, all the different interests, and those change and vary as we see through the examples of the report that's actually in front of us. It's a well-crafted report, and I would hope that this could be utilized as a model as we move forward with respect to complexity of things that we'll be dealing with, because we have a smaller council and greater expectation is expected of us and staff in terms of the reports that are being brought forward. So again, I just simply wanted to lend my voice in acknowledging the work that the staff have actually done, and also to focus the point as to some of the comments that were made by members of the community here today, that we will consider the concerns that you raised going forward as part of ensuring that this works for everybody, and so going forward. So thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Cressy, you have the motion. Councillor Butcher, Grimes is suggesting as a package we will take the vote. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. All right. Also, the time is also quite moving fast. So as a package, Madam Clerk, are we okay with doing that? Okay. So everyone has read the motions and so on. So Councillor Cressy's motion all together as a package. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Thank you very much. And that's the next part. And item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving right along, members. We are now moving to EC 2.5. Oh, 2. I held 5 as well. No, I didn't adopt 1. I'd held. I know, on that one item. Okay, so members, okay, so sorry, my mistake. We'll just move to ED 2.6. Staff, I know that you're really happy that your item got approved, but I just wonder if you could maybe just be a little bit quieter on your way out, please. So, members, I know we've got about a half an hour. ED 2.6, appointment to Business Improvement Area Management. I know that there's been a request to defer this particular item, and I suspect that's where we will go. But I just wanted to ask a question because of the timing associated with folks. Order, please. I'd like to just ask for quiet so that we can continue to conduct the meeting, engage in the meeting. We need to engage. Just maybe ask the public and staff who are talking, maybe just to take your conversation outside where you're able to engage in that process. I've held this item, and I just simply wanted to ask Mr. Major, there's some timing issues that I wasn't really clear of with respect to, there's a request to bring this item back in June, I believe.
That's the motion, yes?
Yes, and I'm wondering, so to bring that back in June, does that have an impact with respect to the BIA in terms of conducting business?
So to you, Mr. Chair, yes, it could be problematic in that at the annual general meeting, the membership voted to limit discretionary spending until the new board comes into place. So any deferral till June will tie the hands of the board in terms of providing the flowers that they want to do. They won't be able to order the flowers or plan other events until the new board is in place.
Right. Well, I presume that the local council and others have taken this into consideration, having had some conversation. The motion's coming from two councillors. Have they discussed the matter with you?
They did not discuss the implications of a deferral with me.
But the matter was discussed with you?
The councillor had some concerns with the names that are put forward for nomination.
Oh, okay. So that's the issue?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Oh, Councillor, pardon? So, Councillor, just one thing. So, in bringing back this item in June, what is the expectation in terms of between now and then? What will actually happen from your sense?
So, to you, Mr. Chair, I guess if this motion moves forward, we will be asked to examine any irregularities that are brought to our attention.
Right. But is there another way to deal with this other than to defer it in order to ask you and your team to look into this particular matter? Is there another way?
To you, Mr. Chair, I was in attendance at the annual general meeting along with Mr. Carew, and our role there was to chair and ensure impartial chairing of the proceedings and to ensure adherence to the code. And
my question, though, is there another way with respect to moving this matter forward other than to defer it in order to allow you and your team to look further, to talk and consult with the local councillors and so on, or local councillors in order to bring this matter back? Is there another way? Because you have indicated that there has been a request for limited expenditure. It hasn't been that the suggestions that no expenditure be made. It's limited.
Limited to funding for a Mother's Day event. The other option would be we could report directly to council on any issues that that the councillor may be aware of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's my question.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Carroll suggested also, but when is the next meeting besides this meeting? Our next meeting here.
What's the date? It's April. It's April.
April 3rd.
April 3rd.
So just if we can ask Mike Major, if we can defer this till the 3rd, and then we could defer it again, give the two councillors an opportunity to work things out, would that be April 3rd? Is that okay?
That's
Give them time to
certainly,
order their flowers?
through you, Mr. Chair, that's certainly more preferable than waiting till June or July.
Well, I would change my deferral to April the 3rd, give both councillors the opportunity. Yeah.
1 second, Councillor. But if you've concluded the question, that's fine. Maybe when you speak, you can do that as part of your...
Well, I'm just going to say, give my intention that we put it to the 3rd, give them an opportunity.
No, that's fine, but it'll give you a chance to speak to it and so on. Any further questions?
No, I was going to suggest something else, but that we can form consensus around that. We can defer it and defer it again if we need to.
Okay, fair enough.
I really wish the local councillors were here to tell us why they need till June. That would have been a great courtesy.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Major. Mr. Major.
Likes that.
Mr. Mayor Major. Mr. Major.
Congrats on the promotion, Mike.
You're happy with your job. Yeah, it's less stressful, I think. Thank you very much, Mr. Major. All right, to speak, Councillor Grimes, you have carriage of this particular item, and
Yeah,
there's no
so,
other question. Go ahead, please.
Councillor Robinson, Councillor Cole asked me to defer to that date, so hearing from Mr. Major, I think the best route would be to go to the next day, and as Councillor Carroll said, we defer it again, but give them an opportunity to sit down with staff, hear what the problems are. So I'll move that we defer till the April 3rd meeting of this committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll notify both councillors what's happening.
Yeah. Okay, so the motion is on the screen. So we are moving a deferral to April the 3rd to allow for further consultation and discussion with the local councillor and the BIA staff members from EDC. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Major. All right. So moving right along, members, we have a couple more items left, which is EC 210, and I'd held that particular item, and I wanted to just know if anyone else had questions. Councillor Cressy, you may begin.
Just a couple. To Mr. Raftis. So I noticed in the report, as part of the federal government's Reaching Home program, that they have an objective to reduce chronic homelessness nationally by 50% by 2027-28. What is Toronto's homelessness reduction target?
Through the chair, so the city has really a plan, a service plan that relates to the entire housing continuum, from eviction prevention to making sure that we move people quickly out of homelessness and then keep them from going back into homelessness. There is not a direct number that we would say was a target.
Okay, so we have a program to provide pathways out of homelessness, but we don't actually currently, as the City of Toronto, and this is the whole city, it's not just SSHA, we currently do not have a City of Toronto target for homelessness reduction.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carroll, question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. The coordinated access program, it looks at, we're going to be working with other service providers. Does that mean also NGO providers?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so could we possibly end up with an expense here that we'd end up bearing? Is this going to be technologically, pardon me, is this going to be technologically based? And could we end up with a price tag we didn't anticipate?
Through the chair, I wouldn't say so, right? I wouldn't believe so. This, in terms of the program here itself, we've been receiving this funding. It's been the homelessness partnering strategy for many, many years. This is an extension of that funding with a new name under the National Housing Strategy for the next 5 years. There is an increase to that. We understand. We don't know what the allocation rules are just yet. We're going to find out in April, but there's an additional $1 million that will go towards reducing homelessness.
Oh, okay. So maybe I didn't make it there. I'm talking about the price tag of achieving the coordinated access program specifically. So, because this has long been a thing, really, if you wanted to do this well, you'd almost be talking like a sort of e-health for the homeless. That we really are coordinated so that we're faced with a case, we would really have access to all that might help help resolve this case and get this person to a home. Is there a real ambition around really doing this well in the larger cities, and therefore it would mean some some technology? And has that discussion been had with the federal partners?
Through the chair, yes, we are currently having that discussion. There is always risk, although this is tied to the National Housing Strategy, and we are applying through a different program to support that. So we believe they are connected, and we are feeling positive at this time about that approach.
And is it possible, it might already have happened, this is something that we've been wanting to do ourselves under the old program. Will we be getting a report that really looks at how we would achieve this, independent of other parts of the homelessness strategy? How we will actually create that really well-connected, coordinated access program?
Through the chair, yes. So I would say on two fronts. The HOT plan that is coming through targets the entire housing continuum and the need for improved data and those types of things, but also our service plan will be informed from the development of that HOT plan, and we are working with community partners such as the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness on improved data collection and strategies.
Okay, thank you. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. What is that sound? Oh, okay. Okay, we're good. Okay, we are all alert now, so we're good. Just through to staff, on page 5, it talks about increased flexibility for communities, where the HSP targets for communities to be spent is being reduced from 65 to 50%. Can you help me to understand what that flexibility is, or how I can recognize that as a benefit?
The past HPS focused on 65% of funding being dedicated towards Housing First initiatives. The City of Toronto has been a leader in Housing First and one of the first communities across the country embarking on this. They've moved away from a programic-specific focus and moved into an outcomes focus. So instead of having funding tied to a specific program approach, they're now going to be looking for an outcome-based assessment. That provides flexibility to Toronto and to others to develop systems that work locally.
So supportive housing and those sort of features would be enhanced, is that?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the system management system that you use for shelter management and so on, is there a requirement as we move into this new structure that you will have to change that?
Through the chair, no. We continue to improve our SMIS system as it is, and we have a complete data strategy that we're working on within shelter support and housing. And I wouldn't say that this continuation of this funding impacts that at all.
Okay, because I was just, when I sort of read it, I thought when it talked about information system, that it talked a little bit about the implementation and so on, and I wondered whether or not there was a different system that would be utilized as part of this new change. But I'm happy to hear that, so thank you very much for that. So, okay, to speak. All right, Councillor Cressy to speak.
Just 30 seconds. I mean, the report in front of us is a good one, and it's to authorize us to accept funds. So the only reason I want to indulge, or to use a few minutes here at the mic, is simply that I'm working on 30 seconds. The only reason is that I think in this term, the objective of establishing targets towards the reduction in homelessness and tying our programmatic work to those reductions is increasingly critical. And whether that's through housing allowances, supportive housing, the barometer for success in our work going forward cannot simply be how many beds are in use and what the capacity is, but rather how many people are we getting out of homelessness. I just want to flag that as part of our ongoing work, the reports coming back on supportive housing, reports to come on housing allowances and others, that should be the metric we use going forward. And I just wanted to take advantage of this moment to say that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. I don't think there's any further need for me to comment on that. I think you've clarified and helped us with that. So those are on the line of the comments I would have made, and I think we've gotten some information further to clarification. So thank again to the staff and so on. So all those in favor of this particular item? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Carroll, it now brings us to the last item of the day, which is your item that I'd indicated to you that I'd held that for you, which is the partnership that produces best practices for international metropolitan partnerships.
Yes.
Do you have questions?
I think probably Carol has a motion because we set it up to have reporting back in April, but there are 2 meetings in April, so we need to be specific. So we're moving it to the April 3rd meeting, which is the very next one. I just want to take a second to thank the chair and thank our clerk secretary, because we're returning now to, this is the way we load things into the agenda that gets us away from the practice of having 75 notices of motion on the council agenda. So I want to thank the chair for happily taking a piece of correspondence and the clerk making it an item on the agenda, which is really the way we can inform agendas and do city business. We got away from that, and I was happy to learn from my own staff. My chief of staff told me, no, we've been trained. We can do this now. We just have to know when the agenda briefing is, and we'd gotten away from that. So this is how I'm going to feed all my interests into the agendas in the future, because we're in a safe space now, and I'm very happy about that. This one, I also want to thank the chair and the clerk for attaching the report in advance. I really want to encourage people to have a look at the report. I always get a lot out of hearing what the authors have to say about it, and so that's why I'm moving that the Board of Trade come and depute. We have partnered with them really well in almost every sort of international endeavor we've had. And they wrote the check to get this exhaustive report done and have J.P. Morgan help them out with it. And it's a look at our international work, warts and all, that we probably wouldn't have in our current budget state have been able to afford to pay a third party to spend the amount of time that was spent on this report to do. So if you read the report, you may have some questions for the authors when they come to present, but I think that there's no question that this committee and our chair will use this going forward, because we still have a lot of international work to do. This talks about, well, you might go there with a lead, on an international interest. Are you maximizing everything else? And I'll use one example. We spent 36 hours in Tokyo total. But I, before leaving here, spoke to the CEO of Transit and said, what should I look at while I'm there? And the mayor was kind enough to agree that I should stay for an extra 24 hours to do it. I am still coasting on what I learned from walking around Tama Plaza, which is a suburban transportation hub, such as we truly have to contemplate becoming the case anywhere in west, north, or east parts of our map. That's really, if you think about it, once you put in that massive bus terminal, that's what Scarborough Town Centre is going to be like and should be like. But have we loaded in all the community services along with the retail that you can once you put all that transit there? I got that out of just dropping by an international partnership for 36 hours, added those few additional hours to add that learning to just following up the economic development lead. And that's the kind of thing that this report starts to outline, how we can better do that and get bang for our buck every time we access one of these relationships. So I look forward to the presentation that will come out of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. And I just wanted to add my voice to this really important issue, and to ensure that we follow some procedural processes, which we have established and Council has endorsed an international process for us to advance the city's interest in looking at partnerships, looking at investment, and looking at areas around the world where we could seek to not only develop sort of a better sense as to what other metropolises are doing and so on, but also how we communicate to sell what we do here in this city globally. And I'll give you an example of something, as Councillor Carroll has given us as an example. Yesterday in Scarborough, I received a delegation from Turkey, Istanbul to be exact. About 2 years ago, myself and then I guess the director for business retention and business services, George Spezza, who has since retired early this year, who, by the way, has started working with Crosslinks, I think this week. And so he's doing some interesting economic development work there. But yesterday I had the opportunity to receive the president and CEO of a very large Turkish engineering and construction company in my office. And I had met this gentleman in Turkey about 2 years ago. We talked about Toronto, we talked about, you know, the opportunities that are here and so on. And he indicated to me then, you know, let me consider, you know, what I wanted to do for our company's continued growth in Canada, because they've had some business in Alberta, some business in Montreal, but none in Toronto. And I asked the question why, and yesterday he came and met me at the Scarborough Civic Centre. We had a great meeting with the head of the Canadian operation and so on, and he came to say that he had decided that he wanted finally to do something in Toronto. So he came to explore, looking at Toronto and wanting to work with the city and so on, and in the areas of plastic and using that for conversion to make fuel. And he wanted to know how the city of Toronto could help him. We're in the process of doing that and so on. That business that we're hopefully going to realize and so on and so forth, and that engagement and so on would not have happened unless we had actually gone and did the work that we had done and so on. And I know oftentimes, you know, people in the media are critical and so on, but that's their issue. I just want to deliver on the results in terms of what the benefits are and how we attract opportunities in our city and create opportunity of wealth for our residents and so on. The work that the WTC and the Board of Trade's actually doing, it's extremely helpful, and obviously they've gone out and paid for this work. I've had a chance to review it. It coincides to the conversation the general manager of EDC and I have been having about reviewing our own international work. There are activities that we're planning right now for the mayor and also members of this committee and so on, the things that we're going to do globally to ensure that Toronto not only has a recognition in terms of the model city that we are, the diversity and so on, but in terms of attracting business. It's not going to happen unless we make the effort to actually attract it. And our efforts and our knowledge is extremely important. So every member of this committee is part of that, if you will, in terms of going out to attract business, and whether or not it's traveling internationally, traveling to Montreal or someplace else across this country to seek out and to look for those opportunities. We're going to continue to encourage that because we know what the benefits are. We know that when we export things, it creates greater wealth for our residents. We know that the economy is a little bit sluggish at the moment, and we have to do what we can to ensure that we are a viable place of interest for investment opportunities and so on. So I support the request and going forward, and hopefully we will then devise and continue our plan that we've actually had in place now for some time, reinforcing it, re-enhancing it and so on, so that we have a better approach in terms of how we want to collectively go out and seek investment opportunities, as well as to create opportunities where our local companies as well can also chart path out into the international community. Because a lot of places, it requires government to open the door and then for businesses to actually create the opportunities. I know that that's something that's lost on many, but it does require government, because in our system, maybe people look at us and say it doesn't require us here. It may not, but globally, it requires us. It's extremely important. All right, so those are my comments. Councillor Lai, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Councillor Carroll, for putting this on the agenda. I think this is one of the subject that is actually quite close to my heart, being a global trotter myself. And I guess I have 3 questions that I want to ask staff, if I may. You may not have any questions.
So, Councillor, just with respect, so we're speaking now. What I would suggest is that at the appropriate time, just offline, because this is what we're actually saying. We're bringing back a report in April. So at that point,
well,
we'll be able
in that case, maybe I'll just switch it to, there are 3 items I wanted staff to actually come
look
back
at,
with.
sure.
You know, you don't have to give me the answer now, but I think it's very important that we do it, the report in the way that, you know, there's not too many questions or whatever. But I don't know, but I just wanted to see whether there are any relationships that we have now for Toronto, for other twinning of other cities, or, you know, sistering or friendly city or whatever. Do we have any of those instances now? I just, you know, as a new
26.
member, I wanted to know.
We have a lot of different relationships.
Yeah, I wanted to know those information. And the other thing is that, is there a criteria or any kind
Yes.
of policy that we do for
We have
twinning,
those.
whatever? Okay, good. And the third one is that what have we been doing or taking advantage of these so-called twinning or
Sure.
sisters?
And
So
we can provide you with that
yeah.
information
So
later.
that will be, that will be what I think will be good.
Sure. Okay.
But I support the motion.
Okay, fantastic. Councillor Carroll, you had a point of order?
Can I just ask a question of the mover, though? I mean, you need that information for your own self, but I'm wondering if the motion requires staff to bring a report to the next meeting.
It's
because
no
I would
motion.
rather.
It's not a
moving
motion,
a
I'm sorry,
motion.
I'm just comment.
Oh,
It's just my
okay, so you
comment.
just want an
loud.
undertaking that you know that going into the presentation?
Right.
Because just to preview for it, I fully intend, when they give the presentation, just the motion that I'll be moving is simply that, because I know that the general manager was anticipating doing a review this year. All I'll be moving at that time is that report inform that report.
Correct.
So that it all comes together at a point in the future.
So if I...
I'm good, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to make sure that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So your desire and your intention with respect to wanting more information could be formed as part of the discussion with the GM and can be brought back and so on. And all the questions you've asked, we have answers for all of them. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, so the motion let me just put on the screen, Councillor Carroll's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We have reached the last item, which is this item that we have just dealt with, EC 2.12. And so I would, are we good? We're good. So I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Vice Chair Grimes, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.